What is up, everyone, and welcome back to our NOS4A2 After Show, the show where we break down the latest episode of the latest AMC series based on the book by Joe Hill. I am one of your hosts, Griffin Schiller, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Mike Real School Johnson. Mike, what'd you think of this episode?
Well, you and I, as always, we chat about it a little just before we hit that record button, and we both had the same thing to say. Not a bad episode, but definitely a little all over the place. There were a lot of story elements they were doing with this episode, and they didn't quite congeal and connect, but, you know, it's one of those necessary evils we need, I guess, to set up the final three episodes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I could describe this episode in one word, it would be scatterbrain. It was a little all over the place for sure, but you know, we'll get into that as we start to discuss the episode. If you are brand new to the show and this is your first time watching, basically what happens is we kind of give our overall thoughts at the beginning. We break down the episode. We kind of go through it, talk about the things we like, talk about the things we didn't like, and then that's really the show. It's very casual, very laid back. We've really appreciated the support you guys have given the show thus far. I really did not expect you guys to enjoy it as much as you do, or as you have, but we enjoy recording it. We enjoy watching the show and discussing it, so I'm glad you all are enjoying it as well. Be sure, before we get into this, to let us know your thoughts and opinions on episode number 7, Scissors for the Drifter, down in the comments section below. And as I just mentioned, the name of this episode is Scissors for the Drifter. And Mike, I'm going to pass it over to you for to take us through this episode.
Okay, so this is going to be one of those things, because I remember we had to do this, I think, with episode 5, where I'm trying to recap this thing, and Griffin, you constantly would be like, oh, wait, don't forget this part. This is going to be one of those.
Because it's all over the place. Yeah,
it really is, and I know I'm going to forget something. So, but the opening's pretty good. I mean, we kind of join Vic once again after she was in the hospital, after she was kind of committed, and we see that, you know, she's been trying to get rest, but obviously that's not happening. She has her medication. She's still living with her mom. Her mom's trying to really help her out, but the opening sequence is very dreamlike. And to be honest, I wasn't even completely sure if it was a dream or if it was reality, because
it feel like it. Yeah, it felt.
They mess with both, which I kind of liked. So interesting way to open the show. And basically what it is that Vic wakes up. She hears the phone ringing. It's that kind of old school. They call those landlines for all you millennials out there, that, you know, attached to the wall kind of phone.
Yes.
So she hears this noise. She goes downstairs and her mom's watching TV, and her mom's just like, hey, kid, what's going on? Like, go back to bed, you know, get some sleep. And she's like, Mom, aren't you going to answer the phone? So she goes and she answers the phone. And it was her friend, Haley, supposedly, whether it's a dream or not, calling from Christmas Land. And you can kind of hear she's got that creepy kid vibe going on. And then, which brings me to my first critique of this episode. We are introduced to a new character, right? And it is a different little girl. And to be brutally honest, when she starts speaking, I had no idea it was a different little girl.
I had the same exact thing happen to me. I was like, "Oh, this isn't still Haley." So it was a little weird, and I don't know how they would have been able to differentiate that. But yeah, it was a bit odd. I think maybe if they had had this girl calling, pretending to be Haley, that could have been creepier. Like she can like shift her voice or something like that. That would have been like really creepy. Because I thought the beginning of this episode, I actually really enjoyed it, because it set up a very unsettling, you know, atmosphere. We weren't sure, like you mentioned, we weren't sure whether it was a dream, whether it was real. It was real, because Vic says later in the episode that she hasn't slept since she was sedated in the asylum.
There you go.
So. Yeah, and so like kind of playing with that, and then the like really playing with the supernatural in there would have been cool, like the shifting of the voice, and that would have been like perfect Stephen King type stuff. A lot of the stuff in this episode did feel like classic Stephen King kind of unsettling horror, if you will, especially the stuff with the Wraith, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But Yeah, that was a little tricky, and then that's not the only time she gets the phone call. She does get a phone call later on, and the only reason I was able to know who was speaking was because they cut back to Christmas Land and show the two of them together on the phone.
Right.
And so that was a little weird. And we don't really know who this girl is. I don't know whether she is just one of the many children he's kidnapped, or when we get to the end of the episode and we have this girl go up to him and like say father or something like that. Now, before going any further, I'm sure many of the kids call him father, but there was something interesting about that where it's like, I think this girl is actually his legitimate child, you know, maybe from his time with Jolene. Is that her name? Jolene or
yeah.
Jolene? Yeah. So that kind of got the wheels turning there, but it was interesting though, that whole setup. I just wish they had maybe been a little creepier with it, which is weird because it was already creepy to begin with.
Yeah, for sure, and especially because it's an interesting choice to introduce this character kind of this late in the series, or at least the first season, right? Like we've only got 3 left, so you kind of go, okay, what part is she really going to play in the remainder of the show? And obviously for her to step in, it's got to be important, because if it was just, them trying to lure Vic to Christmas Land, or, for Manx to try and, I don't know, manipulate her, we didn't really need this character. But this is like, okay, this is an important character.
Yeah.
And I think you're right in terms of that kind of mystery about who she may be, because, throughout the episode, he's once again referred to as Father Christmas, and that everybody in this neighborhood, or, in that part of the country, they go, oh, you look like the guy who's Father Christmas and all, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So when she says at the end, like, welcome back, Father, you're kind of like, okay, Father Christmas or biological father.
It was, I actually really did enjoy that line of uncertainty that they kind of play with, because if she is legitimately his daughter, that's something interesting that can be explored, the rest of the episodes of the season, or maybe in next season or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And then the one little tidbit that you guys, I don't know if you caught this, but she has that same kind of creepy rhyming thing that Bing does.
Yeah, I did catch that. Yeah.
So when she's speaking, I think it's the second conversation that she has with Vic over the phone. She actually calls herself something Manx. And that's what it sounded like. Yeah. But again, the question becomes, is this something that all of the children, when they become these lost children of Christmas Land, kind of take on his name as, a surrogate child? Or once again, is it biological? Is she actually a Manx, right? So it's kind of interesting. And she's an interesting character, and I like the way they introduced her, which is good. Sure. We find out more about Manx as well, and I think as this story continues, we'll talk about that and maybe their connections. But the other thing is that, as we progress with Vic's story, the next morning, she supposedly wakes up, but she just kind of is getting ready for school, and she finds out that her mom has sold her bike, so that her knife is gone. This is an important plot point. Yeah. But she knows, because of what Jolene has taught her, that bike didn't have to be her only knife. So she starts to try to get her stuff together, and she's like, okay, I got to focus. I got to, get Haley back and all this kind of stuff. So she goes to a bike show with her dad. Yeah, which is allegedly
even before that, I just want to say that this is where a lot of the character drama with Vic comes in, and I thought a lot of it worked. Some of it I was a little wishy-washy on. It's interesting because if we go back to like when she first has that encounter with her mom, I struggle with the relationship with her mom, and maybe this is intentional. It probably is, but it's like I feel like they go through these phases of like understanding and really getting each other, and then like the mom will do something just completely ridiculous, and Vic will just like, and then their relationship is really tarnished, and so it's just it's a weird dynamic, which I can only assume is purposeful because it's supposed to signify this broken relationship, but like they still have a mutual understanding. So I don't know. It's weird. But then even before she goes to the bike show with her dad, I mean, she's like freaking out, and she goes and she calls Maggie. Maggie's like, nope, I'm done. See you later. And so she feels like let down by that. And then she feels like she has no other option but to resort to calling her dad, and seeing what it took for her to do that, and knowing that her dad did not come to visit her in the hospital. I mean, Vic is incredibly broken in this episode, and I think that Ashley Cummings is incredible in this episode in particular, because she's all over the place. She doesn't really know how to take all of this. She doesn't want to admit the fact that her dad is not a good person, and has just continuously let her down and manipulated her emotions in a way. As we find out when they go to that bike show. But then, not only is that really powerful, but then we see her, and this is where it starts to get a little wishy-washy with the relationships. We see her with, her preppy boy toy here walking down the street, and then they start holding hands, and I'm like, oh, okay, they're dating now. That's interesting. Or maybe they're just seeing each other, and there's an encounter between the two of them where preppy douchebag guy is obviously throwing out just a bunch of stuff that's pretty insulting. But at the end of it, he has a point that kind of sticks with her, and it really allows her to come to terms with the fact that her dad's a drunk. He does stuff to really throw her off the scent of it, and try and, he basically he tries to win her over with gifts, and just to make her feel like nothing bad is happening. It's just a phase, we'll get over it. But in this episode, she catches on to his tricks, and I feel like even though douchebag preppy guy was out of line, I think he was able to get to her in a way that made her realize that her dad is just not. He's not the person that she thought he was, and it's, she can't rely on him to be there for her, which I thought was a very heartbreaking through line throughout this episode.
Yeah, and you know what? Through line's the perfect word for that, because if I can kind of group in a few of the storylines to try and tie things together a little bit, because like we had said, it's a bit of a hodgepodge. It was really an episode about how Vic has nobody to depend on.
Yeah.
That thing with her mom selling her bike, and she's livid. She goes, "That wasn't yours to sell. You had no right." Yeah. So like you said, that relationship is broken again. She calls Maggie, but Maggie's like, "Nope, I've retired," which I found kind of like super convenient. Like, I get it has to give them a challenge, you know what I mean? But this is Maggie in a nutshell. I think for this entire series is that Maggie is really just, what does Maggie need to be in this episode? Right. And they go, well, right now she needs to be somebody unreliable, or in early episodes she needs to be a mentor who can give us the exposition of the world. So to
be fair, I think Maggie did get a fair amount of good stuff in this episode, which we'll talk about after the Vic stuff. But I was like, okay, we're getting to know this person a little more.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'll give you that much. But it's one of those things where, again, we're in the 7th episode, and part of me goes, okay, well, where was this for Maggie earlier? Because again, Maggie's like a very important character, right? Both in the novel and in the series so far. But the importance in the TV show so far has been mainly as a plot device. That's how I felt. And we kind of commented, I think, in the early episodes, we weren't too keen on Maggie's acting, but I give this actress all the credit in the world, because quite frankly, I don't think she's given a whole heck of a lot until this episode.
Yeah,
like
I completely agree. Yeah, I think we misplaced the blame early on, because I think that it's tough, because you're right, the material she's given isn't really that great, and I don't think the character is written all that well. But the actress, I think she's really, and I forget her name, so that's totally my fault for not pulling it up. But I think she's really come into her own as the character, especially this episode. She feels a lot more comfortable, and they're actually giving her some meaty stuff to somewhat sink her teeth into. So I think going forward, if they continue to flesh out the character like they're doing, maybe in season 2 or something like that, really go headfirst into diving into Maggie and who she is, the character's only going to get better. But I do agree with you. Some of the choices they made with her, especially her just being like, oh, no, I'm done. I mean, it's just very cliched writing.
Yeah. And, we can touch on that a little bit too, I think, with Maggie, because, her storyline starts to really fall apart just in terms of her motivation and how much help she is for Vic. And, what's kind of interesting about this, now we can give the writers a little bit of credit with her writing, was that, when the sheriff, I think his name's Joe, when the sheriff finds her at one point, she's just tripping out on a bench. She is just completely over medicated herself. And he's kind of like, and so I got the impression that this has happened before, which is really interesting because, that kind of motif of addiction and how it can ruin you, that motif of abuse leading to addiction, like all of these people in Vic's life who have had these really traumatic experiences, whether it's her dad with, one of the wars. I can't Afghanistan.
It was the Gulf War. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So the Gulf War, and then, coming back, and his mother is obviously, Vic's mother is obviously abused, by the hands of her father. So it's, really interesting how everybody deals with this. And we get to see Maggie kind of join that thematic string as well, which is, I thought, really good because, again, it's reflecting everything and the people, quite frankly, who Vic is attracted to as well. You know what I mean? Like, they're all very damaged people. These are the people that she supposedly can count on, but everybody in her life is damaged somehow. So, but it's interesting you brought up that the whole preppy part, because that subplot I really wanted to resolve very quickly. And we kind of knew where they were going with this, and we have talked about it in previous episodes, because we know that she has two love interests. She's got the preppy guy and she's got the kind of greasy art kid who, God love him, is like, just so
art kid. Is he really an art kid though? He talked about how he sucks at art.
That's true. And he that's right. He joined the course strictly to be with Vic. Right. So, but the two of them, obviously represent different worlds and all this kind of stuff. And we kind of all knew where this was going to, because we were like, there's no way she's going to end up with Preppy. Like, there can't be, nobody wants that. And so they have their falling out, and, part of Vic's storyline is resolved. And I wish I remembered these characters' name, but, the kid that's been into her from the beginning, he witnesses a lot of stuff. And it's really important to see a connection between the two of them, because, Vic maybe feels like maybe he could be the only one that she could rely on. Because,
I mean, you kind of go, because I think you were about to go into this. That's the thing that I really liked, is like, she's freaking out. The interaction that I loved was after she got that second phone call from Haley and the other demon child. She goes back to the table and she's like slamming beers and she's like shoving it in her dad's face and calling him out on his shit. That interaction, I ate that up. I thought that was some of the best, character drama out of the entire series. Like, because it was her finally realizing that her dad is a piece of shit who just, he loves her, but he tries to like buy her love in a weird way. And so just, it was heartbreaking. It was really well acted. I mean, it was just one of my favorite parts. And then she walks outside and she's like freaking out, and the kid is like, I don't care about all that shit. Are you okay? And I was like, that's exactly what she needed. This is great.
This is the guy.
This is the guy. Yeah. Like, I mean, like, as cliched as it is and whatnot, but like it worked though, because that's exactly what she needed in that moment. And side note, I'm really happy that she didn't just like kiss him or sleep with him or something like that. I feel like a lesser show would have really just gone head first into that romance, like physical sort of romance. But no, that didn't happen, and I was very pleased to see that, because I almost would have rolled my eyes if that was the case. It would have just gotten way more melodramatic, and but I did like that, and you saw like just kind of like the change in her, face, like the light kind of flicked on, and she felt like someone actually cared about her, it was nice to see her comforted in this moment of just like disarray and just not confusion and depression and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Craig is the character's name. I was looking it up as you were
Craig.
speaking.
Yeah, it is Craig. Thank
there
you.
go.
Yeah,
so we got to give him credit because Craig has been there since the beginning. And
you're right.
I think
he has been. Yeah.
He, in a sense, he's like a fan favorite as well because, we all wanted this kind of soft-hearted kid to kind of, get with Vic.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I got to give the actor credit because I think he's one of the only people who's doing a convincing New England accent.
Right. Consistently.
Exactly. Doing convincing New England accent. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody else goes away. But we should go back to that scene that you were talking about, I think, with the confrontation with her father, because it was great that Vic really kind of exercised a lot of personal demons in this one, because as we had kind of mentioned, she does get used by her father. Her father is manipulative. And, throughout the first half of the season, we were always talking about, okay, is he legitimately a good guy or is he a piece of garbage that, just kind of manages to say the right thing once in a while, right?
Yeah.
And this one really comes out because she even talks about, the connection that they had in terms of the bike, right? In terms of her original knife. Do you remember why you got that? And she said, really? You keep telling me it's because I lit up like a Christmas tree, but I know damn well it's because you went on a bender, the day before and you bought it as like a half-assed apology and all this kind of, and once again, we've given Ebon or Eben, whatever the actor's name that I think a lot of people loved him in the first season of Punisher. Yeah. Solid actor.
Yeah.
And once again, the way he conveyed the pain of being confronted
good. Yeah.
And didn't say a word, right? Like he got a sense. Yeah. It was really good. And again, that says a lot where we know he's a piece of garbage. We know he's used and abused his wife. He's used and abused his daughter, either physically or emotionally. He's cheated. He's an alcoholic, all this kind of stuff. He's never been there truly for Vic because, again, we've seen in previous episodes when she needs his help, he's kind of like, well, maybe I can do this. Or like, I don't file taxes. So, you can't rely on me for this. And, so we see a lot of that. And it's crazy because they could so easily turn him into an antagonist, just purely an antagonist. But the way that scene goes, and then he says something that I think a lot of people understand. He goes, I hope you never have to go through disappointing somebody you love. And I was like, oh, man, that's a great line.
Yeah, it was a good line. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about the writing, too. We're just kind of like, that's good stuff. So, that scene was great. And like you said, there was a really important character moment. And then Craig kind of comes in and he's like, I've always been there for you, all this kind of stuff. And I got you a pin to commemorate the fact that you were, in the hospital. Yeah. Did you happen to notice what the pin was?
I didn't fully see what it, I think it'll probably be important a little bit. It's probably her new knife or something like that for all I know. But I think my only critique with her relationships are that I feel like they need to be fleshed out a little bit more. Like, I mean, the relationship with Craig, like, I get it. Like, he's been around since she was a kid, but, like, I don't really feel that because he hasn't really been around this show all that much. He, like, pops in here or there, and she's just like, okay, whatever. But he's never been, like, a main focus. Kind of similar to the, preppy kid. He pops in here or there, how did they get from, their last encounter to now dating? And so it's just like, it feels a little condensed. But it's not the most interesting thing about this show. So I don't care that much, but at the same time, it would have been nice to just get a little bit more,
Yeah, for sure. So let's see if we can tidy up some of these other things.
Right,
I know pretty good with Vic.
We've got the Vic stuff going on. We've got a little bit of Maggie, and then Manx.
Well, let's finish up the Maggie stuff.
Oh yeah, let's go to the Maggie.
Okay, we'll get to Manx because I think the important thing with Maggie is that she's taken home by the sheriff. Like Sheriff Bly, that's his last name. I can't. Anyways, so she, because again, they've set up that kind of surrogate father-daughter relationship in the past, and he says, I care for you, and I'm gonna look after you, and all this kind of stuff. So he takes her home to kind of detox her, right? And she wakes up, and there's a note, and there's her phone, and like a glass of milk and a sandwich, right? And so she's kind of like, oh man, I did it again, which again reiterates the fact that she's gone through this. Yeah. And so she's, going through his house. She's like, Joe, like, I'm sorry, I'm such a dick, all this kind of stuff. And then we see that Joe has been taken because they kind of set up earlier that they've got an APB out for this car for NOS4A2 for the Wraith, and the Wraith has been captured. And we won't go into too much of that because that's part of the Charlie Manx, I think, storyline. But the fact is, Joe is like, you know, I'm gonna get on top of this. We're gonna arrest this son of a bitch who's kidnapping all these kids, and we're gonna get it. But we found out that unfortunately he's been kidnapped by Manx. So that wraps up Maggie's. Because now we know, okay, now Maggie is personally invested in this because, you know, there was the whole calling card on top of his squad car where Manx had pinned a candy cane to the windshield. So now, you know, she's going to be like, no, I gotta come in, like, I gotta get off the sidelines, so to speak, and get invested again. So I'm sure that'll happen, you know, probably in the next episode because there's only a few left.
For sure. I mean, it's going to ultimately... what's his name? Joe, right? Is it Joe or is it Bill or what? Some generic name, but
Sheriff.
Good old Sheriff. That's going to be what springs her back into action ultimately, because she sees the card, she knows he's been taken, and so she's like, well, I can't be sitting on my ass doing drugs anymore. I got to actually use my gifts and you know, save him. Unfortunately, she won't be able to, but I guess that getting back in that, so I guess we'll move into the Manx stuff, which a lot of it I liked, but there were some instances where it's like he's walking around, he just looks like a creature from like some horror film, and people just like look at him, they're like, oh, hey old man, and I'm like, this thing does not look like an old man. Like I'm sorry about that. We happened to lose connection, so we had to restart the call here. But yeah, I mean, you know, Manx, it's just one of those logic things that I was just like, I mean, is anyone really gonna pick up this decrepit looking thing? Like, it's just like, there's something very sinister about him. And then like you put him in a car next to this child, like, what? Like,
I know. Especially, you know, what I think makes it even more creepy is the fact that he's dressed like a doorman from hell.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
What it is.
He's got that old chauffeur outfit.
Right. Between his outfit, his like the physical appearance, like his hair, like there's something wrong here. I don't know what. Yeah.
It's so funny. But I really like that little bit though that we get where he's introduced to this, you know, the father and the son, because we have talked about it before where we said, you know, Manx has a code in a sense where he's like, I'll only go after children who are abused or, you know, they're not taken care of or anything like that.
Right.
And what's interesting about this is we see a dad who's clearly invested in his child. Yeah. And, you know, helps out a creepy old man, you know, tells the kid not to be rude because the kid basically says, like, you're really old. And even Manx is like, oh, no need to apologize for the truth because, yeah, he looks like he's 175. He could be. He's pretty close anyway.
Probably is. Yeah.
You know, and then he says, well, here, you know, have a candy cane. And you'd expect the father to be like, oh, you know the rules, you know, no candy from strangers. But he says, oh, you know, we've already had enough sugar for today. Right. Yeah. And the kid just kind of goes, OK. So we see when Manx goes into not the mechanic, but it's like a hardware store.
Yeah,
right?
It's like some sort of like convenience store or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So he's trying to fix up the Wraith, obviously. That, you know, the kid comes back in because he's kind of curious about him. Yeah. And Manx is just like, well, you know, here's the candy cane. He goes, I don't know if I should, like my dad already said. And he was just like, oh, that your father, like, what are you talking about? Like, he's a terrible person. And the kid even defends him, like, my dad's a kind man. And he goes, is it kind to deny a child candy? And it's hilarious because then at that moment you go, yeah, it doesn't matter what's really going on with the parents, because Manx is just gonna make it up where he just goes, you don't get enough candy, you can come too, you're like, I'm gonna kidnap you too, right?
Well, so, I mean, it just kind of like Manx himself is a child, well, not like literally, but the way he acts is very childlike. Like he does, like his way of looking at the world and his logic is very like, well, that's not fair, so you're wrong, so I'm gonna do this in order to get what I want. And it's just like really interesting the way that they've kind of drawn those comparisons, and I think it speaks a lot about his his inability to, I don't want to say grow up, because that's not true, but it's like his inability to compromise or just like, you know, be a real person, you know. It's like, and it probably can tie into the fact that, you know, his selfish nature of wanting to live forever. He doesn't care about anyone else, and so it's a very like toddler, you know, child-esque way of looking at things, which I think this is the first episode where that has really like come through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you know what? You kind of touched on something interesting too, where, you know, a childlike adult is somebody, a character that we get quite often throughout, because obviously Bing is very much like a child mentally, even the father in terms of the decisions that he makes, right? And I think even in that confrontation with Vic, you know, Vic even says, it's not my job to be the adult. Yeah. Right? Like, I shouldn't be making the mature decisions. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe we just picked up on something that Joe Hill was trying to throw in there. But
maybe. Who knows?
Maybe. So I really enjoyed the Manx storyline in this one, because we see the real connection between he and the car. And we saw a little bit of that with Jolene setting the car on fire in the last episode, and seeing, you know, what happens to him when the car gets damaged. And so he's trying to fix it up in this one. And what I really liked is once they get to that same, the auto wreck yard that
the one in
they
Nebraska.
Went to.
Yeah.
Right. Which we visited early. I think it was probably the second or third episode.
I think it was
the
second episode. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So it's interesting for a few reasons, because, you know, the woman who went on in the second episode about losing her son and her grandson, I believe, you know, she talks about, you know, it was her
son and her husband. I don't know if her grandson was also, she couldn't have had a grandson because her son was abducted so young, which this is really interesting, because at the end of this episode, there is a short that really goes into what happened with her and her family, which we'll save that to the end. But I think that short is legitimately some of the best stuff I've seen from this show.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see it, so I'm saying yes, like I watched it. But what you were telling me about it, I find really interesting. Yeah. So it's really cool because you know, she recognizes him, and it's funny because Bing even tries to cover up the fact that he's like, oh, you know, Grandpa gets sleepy, you know, when we take long road trips. This,
like fucking vampire dude in the back. Yeah. This woman's just like, yeah, Grandpa, okay.
Yeah.
And just calls the cops. I'm like, it's just like, you can't, I mean, like, I love Big, but he can't fool anyone.
No, that's true.
Which, you know, Bing goes through a little bit of an interesting arc here. We haven't really touched on him, you know, but he's like paranoid that he's going to get killed because Vic gets inside his head. And she's like, hey, listen, his last person that had your job was killed. The same thing's going to happen to you. Don't you think you should probably get out and try and stop this before something happens to yourself? And he's like, and then he just like kind of like runs away. And then we get back to him and Manx is like, she's messing with you. Don't trust her. You're on my nice list. As long as you stay on my nice list, you're going to get into Christmas land. And so once again, Bing is just a dumb idiot and is fooled by Manx. But just seeing
by everybody.
Right. I mean, seeing that, it's like, on one hand, I feel bad for him because he's so easily manipulated. He's a very simple person, and so he can be easily pulled in multiple directions. But at the same time, he's not a good person. So it's like, it's weird. It's very conflicting. But yeah, no, I did enjoy seeing that sort of just like paranoia and conflict inside of him, even though he wasn't really a big focus of this episode.
Yeah, and it gives him that great little moment, you know, about 3/4 of the way through, where he's trying to fix up the car, and we can hear the police sirens in the background because the sheriff is.
First of all, how like those sirens? I swear we're going like from the same distance for like 10 minutes without getting closer, and I was just like,
that's true.
I was just like, what? How? This doesn't make it. This is silly. But I mean, you know, I get it. It's a show. Suspend your disbelief. I mean, this dude's like, he's a vampire who runs off a car. So
Right.
But at the same time, I was just like, really? Like, I feel like they would have gotten there by now.
Yeah, you heard the sirens for a long time.
You really
yeah.
did.
I guess it's a very flat town in Nebraska. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sound
it's like
travels.
we can hear sound.
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, you're right. But that was a good scene because he's like just about to fix up the car and feed it some coolant, and you can see like Manx, like you said, he's like this shriveled little rodent.
Dude, he has just cataracts. He starts to get cataracts in his eye. Did you see that? And that was, I really liked the attention to detail when he was just like dead on the bench. Yeah, so I thought that was really good. And then obviously his transformation scene was actually, it actually wasn't bad for television. I have to admit, it looked pretty convincing.
It's interesting because now we're starting to learn a little bit more, and we had talked about this in previous episodes about the connection with the car, and we were kind of saying like, what are Manx's powers specifically? And because Bing had that moment, and he goes, "You promise not to kill me. You promise not to do this," and he's just like, "Start the car, get us out of here, or we're not going anywhere, let alone Christmas Land."
Yeah.
And so when the car was started, and we got to see Manx rejuvenate right in front of us immediately as well. It now starts to, you can kind of connect the dots where it's like, it's not Manx that needs to feed on these children, that it's the car. The car feeds Manx, so that the car is probably what needs, these souls or whatever is being devoured. Right. And so you just kind of go, okay, well, this is interesting. Okay. Because, I had assumed from early episodes, not really drawing on the book at all, I assumed, okay, well, he is like a vampire, so wouldn't he feed off the kids and then, like all this kind of stuff. And then that's how he became younger. But we see right before our eyes, if the car is healthy, so is Manx. So we kind of go, oh, okay, so there's something a little bit different.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. The one thing that I didn't like about this episode was the final few moments, because they didn't explain it. It was kind of like the moon in the second episode. If you've read the book, you understand it. But if they throw it in the show, you just kind of go, it needs a little bit more. And that's where, the two of them get into the fixed up car after Manx pretty much confronts.
Oh, yeah. And it's like invisible.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Right. So he gives this woman a heart attack, and he's, goes on about like, your son, was, the only thing he ever got for Christmas was like stained tobacco or something. He goes on about that. Your terrible mother, like, you deserve to die. And she's like writhing in pain.
Well, that's the other thing that I liked about and maybe this is jumping a little too far ahead, but that's the thing I liked about the short, was like, you could clearly see that everything he was saying was false. Because in the short, you can see that these are two parents concerned about this kid, and this kid is just like, off doing whatever, and Manx just seduces him and whatnot. So it's interesting when you get to see what Manx is seeing and what he's saying, and then what actually happens. Because 9 times out of 10, they are not lining up, because he's like warping the truth to fit his agenda, basically.
Right. Right. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. So, yeah. So then the two of them, he and Bing get inside the car, and the police arrive right in the nick of time. And he was like, okay, Bing says, what are we going to do? And then Manx is basically like, we don't have to do anything. And then you see that the cops don't confront them at all. They just go to this old woman lying on the ground. And Bing's like, oh, they don't see us. And Manx says, they don't notice us. And then they drive away.
Yeah,
and I go,
that was really,
what the hell is that?
Yeah,
right?
I know.
They kind of threw it out there, and they needed to develop that a little bit. Maybe they will, but it's just one of those things where you go, well, this seems super convenient, and that he drives off, and that's it. So yeah, they need to explain it a bit more, but that was just one part, like the moon in the second episode, where I just kind of go, you back out of the reality that the show has built up, which ironically doesn't have a lot of reality anyways, right? But,
right. Yeah. Well, and speaking of the moon, we get the moon again at the end of this episode when they actually go to Christmas Land with the sheriff in the back of the trunk. And this is actually the first episode where we are taken inside Christmas Land. We get to see a little bit of the layout and that stuff, which I really enjoy. I mean, it's very, very creepy. We get to see kind of like what's going on, and then his conversation with Bing. Bing's locked outside, and so yeah, and then eventually we get to the event, which is probably one of the best parts of this episode, where the kids are like, hey, let's play scissors for the drifter, and then they just fucking murder this guy. Like, they just, it was
that's
pretty,
the end of Sheriff.
Yeah, it was pretty reminiscent of like something out of The Walking Dead, which was cool. But they're like, stabbing him with these scissors, and then they're like eating him alive, basically. So, which is interesting because it just begs the question, how many times has he done this? How many times has he brought like an adult to the land to be eaten? Which also is getting my mind thinking that this is going to be the demise of Bing, because he's going to bring Bing into the park and he's going to be like, hey, welcome to Christmas Land. You're going to die. That sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think you're right where I felt like the visuals for the first time really fit as well, because we've heard so much about Christmas Land. We've even seen that reindeer skeleton with the Christmas lights on its head, some really interesting kind of creepy things. But that was one that I really enjoyed for the first time when I'm watching the show, where I wanted to pause it and look at all of the stuff in Christmas Land. And I love the way they set that up. It's kind of like in the middle of a valley too, with these like ominous dark mountains in the background, right? There's a lot of cool stuff to look at. And then I think I kind of chuckled at this part, but again, it's that macabre humor that the Hill/King family is known for. That when the kids come out of like what looks like their little gingerbread houses, half of them are dressed up as Christmas stuff. So there's like a kid in a teddy bear outfit, right? And you just gotta go, oh my god, right? And then of course they all have those shark-like teeth. But it was great. That was a lot of fun. I mean, like, again, I think I said it in one of the previous episodes where it's like, if this episode didn't hook you, it's not your kind of show. This was the kind of thing that I think a lot of the fans who have given it this much time already, given it 6 episodes, they kind of want to see that fun, goofy, dark horror, right? So I really enjoyed this part, and I'm glad they kind of ended the episode with that section.
Yeah, it was a great way to end the episode for sure. Before we close this out, there was a short film that premiered after the episode. It was actually fairly long. It was like 15, 20 minutes, maybe. Maybe like 15, 12 minutes, somewhere around that range. But and basically what it was it was giving context to the old woman who ran the scrapyard and her family, and kind of like how she lost her son and her husband. And what I will say is, and I know I already said this, but I think this is some of the best stuff I've seen from this show because it plays into the horror elements more. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's really atmospheric. There's a lot of, slow shots and getting to see what really happened for this incident, which is something pretty significant, and how we can imagine Manx went about doing stuff similar to this. I found to be very engaging, and it was like serious, but it like also had like a little bit of the the Christmas Land type humor to it a little bit. But we really get a sense of how the Wraith just poisons the minds of these children, and through it, it's almost like, Manx is really convincing, and he can give you candy canes all day long, but there's something about this car that really draws the kids in, and so getting to see that was creepy. And in the short in particular was very much, it was drawing a lot from Christine, because Manx wasn't even in the episode. He was just or wasn't even in the short. They just, he picked up the phone, and the kid picked up the phone, and Manx was on the phone saying like, oh, put your dad in the trunk and we'll play scissors for the drifter. And then, obviously we know what happens there. So another instance of knowing that this is a common thing that happens, I guess with kids and their parents sometimes. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like it just adds more context to Manx and the car, and like this whole process of abducting the children and how they get fixated on going to Christmas Land and whatnot. But then it also it develops that old woman's backstory a little bit more, and understanding what she lost, and so we're able to feel kind of her pain there, which I loved. I really did enjoy this short. It was well done.
Nice. I hope I can see that sometime. So you recommend it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, very much recommended. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this week's episode of our NOS4A2 recap show, talking about episode number 7, Scissors for the Drifter. Be sure to let us know your thoughts and opinions on the episode down in the comment section below if you've not done so already. Mr. Mike Johnson, thank you for joining me as always. Where can everyone find you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube, of course, at Real School, the best kept secret on YouTube, Twitter at Real School, Instagram, all the big soch, you know how it goes. But yeah, I usually comment when you guys comment on these episodes anyway. So if you're ever looking for me, you can just follow that link.
Yeah, for sure. And, we try and respond to as many of the comments as we can. If it's not me, then it's Mike. So, yeah, definitely leave us your thoughts down there as well. If you like this video, though, be sure to like it, share it with your fellow NOS4A2 fans, and subscribe to this channel for more movie and television-related content on a weekly basis. You can like Men vs. Movies on Facebook, follow us on Twitter simply by searching Men vs. Movies. And lastly, if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, that's going to do it for this week's recap show, and we'll catch you next week. Take care.